Quarantine. Chapter 5. Do it today, Maris Wheeler said. I'm sick of waiting. Alan Sosa wouldn't look at her. She knew he didn't have the stomach for this plan of hers. She's only been here for 2 days, Alan said. It's not as if you've been waiting long. Maris slammed her hand out on the lab table. I have been waiting for almost 2 years, she cried. We've had this healer's DNA for 2 years, and this is the first workable serum we've come up with. I want to know how it affects humans, and I want to know it now. I don't have the serum ready, he said. She knew he was lying. Alan, if you don't stop sniveling, I'm going to test it on you, she said. I mean, I haven't figured out how to administer it without her noticing, he said. It's liquid. It's clear. Dump it in a bottle of water and give it to her, Maris said. Aren't you supposed to be smart? He was quiet for a moment. He was all out of excuses, and she knew it. What you're asking me to do is illegal, he said finally. I'm putting myself at risk. Maris didn't like this part of her job. She preferred to organize things from afar, but every so often she simply had to be the heavy. Alan, so far, no one knows about that little incident in your last company, Maris said pleasantly. You know, when you were embezzling from the research fund? That's a lie, Alan growled. I was set up. Regardless, Maris replied, I can prove that there's money in your bank account that isn't supposed to be there. So why don't you just do me this one little favor and I won't tell anyone about the embezzling? Maris watched with satisfaction as the blood drained from the face of the famous Dr. Alan Sosa. She had him right where she wanted him. I will remain calm and be perfectly pleasant, Liz said as she walked down the hallway to Dr. Sosa's lab. Maria had given her a mantra to say so she could deal with Dr. Sosa more easily. I will remain calm and be perfectly pleasant. She took a deep breath and started to open the heavy door. From inside came the sound of angry voices. Liz hesitated, holding the door a few inches open. Should she wait until Dr. Sosa finished his argument? It isn't right, she heard him yell. Whoever he was talking to was much quieter. Liz pushed the door open a bit farther, hoping to hear. Too far. The door gave a tiny squeak. Ah, Liz, good morning, cried Maris Wheeler. Liz stopped in surprise. She had been expecting to find Dr. Sosa fighting with another scientist, but instead she found no one but Maris. Hi, Miss Wheeler, Liz said. I told you, call me Maris. So how's everything going? Maris asked. Are you enjoying your work with Alan? Liz couldn't help but glance at Dr. Sosa, who stood awkwardly behind Maris. No, I can't stand him, Liz thought. Yes, it's been wonderful so far, she said out loud. Good. I know he feels the same way, Maris replied, turning to look at Dr. Sosa. Isn't that right, Alan? Dr. Sosa smiled at Liz. It looked more like a grimace. Wow, she could make him do anything, Liz thought in amusement. That's probably the first time he's ever smiled in his life. Liz is a very smart girl with a bright future ahead of her, Dr. Sosa said, staring intently at Maris. Maris gave him a cold smile. You better get started, she said, heading out to the door. Dr. Sosa's shoulders slumped, and his fake smile fell away. Fine, he said quietly. What is going on between those two? Liz thought. Whenever she saw them together, there was a strange undercurrent of hostility, but she could never figure out exactly what the issue was between them. Liz put her backpack at the empty workstation that she decided to make her own. Dr. Sosa had never bothered to assign her a place. I will remain calm, she thought. It'd be perfectly... Miss Parker, I have something I'd like to say, Dr. Sosa announced. Liz turned to face him. He was smiling at her, the same forced smile he'd given her in front of Maris. He held a bottle of water in his hand. Okay, Liz replied, plastering a smile on her own face. Dr. Sosa awkwardly handed her the bottle of water. I'd like to propose a toast, actually, he said. To you and your future here at Medichem. Liz didn't know what to say, so she ended up just standing there holding the bottle and looking baffled. Oh, excuse me, Dr. Sosa murmured. He hastily grabbed an empty beaker from his workstation, filled it with water from the tap, and held it up. To your future, he said again, using his beaker of water to toast with. He gestured for Liz to join him. This guy really is a mad scientist, Liz thought in amusement. Either he'd had a gigantic change of heart about her, or else Maris Wheeler had given him a lecture about being nice to the scholarship student. Whatever the reason, he was acting like a completely different person today, and Liz kind of liked him this way. Thanks, Dr. Sosa, she said, tapping her bottle against his beaker in a toast. I hope I do have a long future here. She had barely gotten the bottle to her lips when Dr. Sosa began coughing. Alarmed, she put her water down and hastened to his side. Dr. Sosa, are you okay? Liz cried. He tried to catch his breath. Sure, he wheezed. I'm fine. Finish your drink. Okay, if you're sure, Liz said. She picked up the bottle and took a sip of water, but his coughing continued, and Liz felt weird just standing there and watching him. She leaned over to thump him on the back. Dr. Sosa jumped when she touched her. He jerked away from her, his arm knocking into a rack of test tubes on the counter behind him. The rack fell over, sending the test tubes clattering down to the floor where they broke. The thick pinkish liquid that had been inside then oozed out onto the floor, staining Liz's sneaker. There was a moment of silence. Liz stared at Dr. Sosa, horrified. He looked at her in pretty much the same way. I'm so sorry, Liz yelped. I hope I haven't ruined anything important. Dr. Sosa shook his head slowly. Don't worry, Liz, he said. You are far more important than any of the experiments we've been doing here. What an odd thing to say, Liz thought as she hurried to the closet to clean the supplies. I'll mop this up, Liz called over her shoulder, but when she turned around, Dr. Sosa was gone, the big metal door just closing behind him. Michael poured another giant can of chicken broth into the big soup pot. He loved chicken noodle day. It was by far the easiest soup to make. Order up, Maria called from outside the order window. Michael frowned at her. I'm supposed to say that, not you, he said. Maria turned on her 1,000-watt smile. I know, but I have your order ready. What are you talking about? Michael asked impatiently. Didn't you just order a big, juicy kiss? Maria asked. Michael thought about it. Jeff Parker probably wouldn't think making out of the kitchen was especially sanitary. Then again, Jeff wasn't here, and the crash down was pretty empty. An elderly couple in the corner booth, Kyle and some guy at the counter. No one to rat him out to the boss. I ordered 3 big, juicy kisses, he told Maria. Still smiling, she hopped up onto the counter, propped her elbows on the order window, and leaned through to kiss him. Michael decided to just ignore the soup he was making and concentrate on his girlfriend. That can't be sanitary, Kyle said, shaking his head as he watched Michael and Maria. The guy on the stool next to him laughed. Well, they clearly put a lot of love into the food here, he joked. Kyle nodded. Best burgers in town, and I should know. I used to date the owner's daughter. So you pretty much ate here 3 meals a day, the guy said. You know it, Kyle answered. By the time she dumped me, I was hooked on the onion rings, so I had to keep coming. The guy shook his head. You're unlucky in love, just like me. Well, I don't know about that, Kyle said quickly. I was just unlucky with her, but I do okay. Not me, the guy said, sighing. I just broke up with someone I really liked. Dumped you, huh? Kyle said, taking a swig of Coke. No, I dumped her. Kyle snorted. Okay, what's your name? Jesse Ramirez. Well, listen, Ramirez, Kyle said. Rule number 1 of dating, don't break up with someone you like. What are you, a masochist? Jesse gave him a lopsided grin. No, man, I was just too old for her. Oh, so you were doing her a favor by dumping her. Yeah, Jesse said. Though when you put it that way, it sounds kind of stupid. Kyle emptied his Coke glass. Hey, Maria, he called. Maria waved him away without breaking her lip lock on Michael. I need another Coke, Kyle yelled, undeterred, and one for my masochist friend here. Liz pushed open the door of the crash down and glanced around. Maria and Michael were hanging out of the door to the back room. Kyle sat at the counter chatting with some guy in a suit. It all looked normal, yet something seemed off. It's the lights, Liz thought. The hanging lamps were too bright. She squinted up at them. That's weird. I didn't even know they had a bright setting. Liz, cried Maria, what are you doing here in the middle of the day? She lives here, Michael put in. Duh. He disappeared through the swinging door and went back into the kitchen. Maria approached Liz, talking a mile a minute as usual. Aren't you supposed to be at Medichem? Wait, is today your day off? You didn't get into a fight with that doctor guy, did you? I told you to use my mantra if he was acting like a jerk. Liz winced. Was Maria's voice always this loud? You've got a real death grip on that thing, Maria added. What? Liz said. Why was she so confused all of a sudden? Water bottle. Maria pointed at the plastic bottle in Liz's hand. Liz glanced down in surprise. She'd forgotten she had it. Oh, yeah, she mumbled. She opened it and took a swig. The water tasted funny. I think I'm coming down with something, she told Maria. Is that why you came home from work? Liz shook her head. No, Dr. Sosa had a little freak out and sent me home. I feel bad about it, actually. He was trying to be nice to me, but he had a coughing fit, and I accidentally made him spill some chemicals. For once, Maria was silent. She stared at Liz with big, frightened eyes. Not like a huge chemical spill, Liz said, just a little one. I cleaned it up, and Dr. Sosa said I could have the rest of the day off. The bell over the door jingled, and Liz jumped. Usually she could hear that thing, but today it seemed especially loud and harsh. I'd better go check on the oldsters, Maria said, heading off to the elderly couple in the corner booth. Liz walked slowly over to the stool next to Kyle. Check it out, he said. A mini Maria. He gestured with his head to the little girl who'd just come in. Liz looked at her. She had her hair in 2 braids, just like Maria did today, and she wore shiny lip gloss in the same shade as Maria's. In fact, she looked a lot like Maria. Weird, Liz commented. The girl hopped up on the stool nearest the order window and gazed adorantly at Michael. Really weird, Kyle agreed. This cook is quite the stud, the guy next to Kyle joked. First the waitress, now the kid. Kyle snorted. Liz couldn't help herself. She jerked away from him. Why was everything so loud all of a sudden? So anything new at Medichem today? Kyle's tone was casual, but Liz knew what he was really asking. I was only there for about half an hour, she told him. Dr. Sosa was arguing with Maris Wheeler about something. Then I knocked him into some chemicals in the lab, and there was a spill. He sent me home early. Kyle shrugged. Well, at least you didn't draw any attention to yourself, he said sarcastically. Liz shrugged. Somehow she just didn't care about Medichem right now, even if they did have alien cells in their laboratories. She was too busy trying to figure out why the lights were so bright and the sounds so loud. I'll ask Michael to meet me at Medichem tonight, Kyle said in a whisper. He can open the door to that closet. Liz stared at him in a panic. His voice was so loud she was sure the guy next to him would overhear. But the guy just kept eating his fries. Kyle didn't seem fazed at all. I need to go lay down, Liz said. She jumped off the stool and went through the swinging door into the back room. She made her way into the kitchen to grab a snack, figuring she'd take it upstairs. She dropped her backpack and the water bottle on the counter. It pushed past Michael, who was stirring soup. I like your hair. It's really long, the little girl was talking to Michael through the water window. Liz smiled as she pulled open the fridge and began hunting for the baby carrots they used as garnish. Yeah, thanks, Michael answered gruffly. How come it's so long? Because I'm too lazy to cut it. Michael half-heartedly stirred the soup on the stove. I think boys with long hair are cute. My father doesn't like them, though. He says long hair is undisciplined. Discipline is overrated, Michael said. The girl laughed loudly. Liz clapped both hands over her ears and stood up, glaring at Michael. He looked back at her, a big wooden spoon in his hand. What? He said. I didn't do anything. Liz shook her head. This whole sound distortion thing was getting on her nerves. She snatched a bag of carrots out of the fridge and closed the door. Then she pushed past Michael again. Touchy, he murmured behind her. The girl laughed again. Liz turned around and peered down into his pot of soup. That's a little clumpy for chicken noodle, don't you think? She asked pointedly. Michael glanced through the pot at the congealed mess. Then he reached out, grabbed Liz's water bottle, and poured the rest of the water into the soup. Happy? He asked. Liz rolled her eyes and turned to go upstairs. She really needed to lie down. The little bell over the door tinkled, and Maria glanced up to check out the new customer. Unfortunately, all she saw was her mother. Great, she muttered. The nag patrol was here. Maria, Amy called in her high-pitched voice. Hi, Mom, Maria said with a sigh. You're here for lunch? Nope, I just wanted to drop off the list. Maria pretended not to understand her. What list? The list of errands I needed to run for the business, Amy replied. Just look confused, Maria told herself. Maybe she'll give up and go away. Maria, I know you know what I'm talking about, Amy said. Fine. Maria stuck out her hand for the list. It wasn't fair that her mother could always tell what she was thinking. But I don't see why I have to run errands for your business. I have my own job, you know. Your job doesn't pay the mortgage, Amy said, so my business is important to both of us. Fine, Maria said again. Yo, Maria, order up, Michael bellowed from the kitchen. Maybe I will stay for lunch, Amy said. Sit wherever you want, Maria told her sulkily. She stomped over to the order window to pick up the apple pie a la mode for the old couple. On the stool closest to the window sat that little girl who'd been hanging around in front of Michael's place. Sadie, Maria remembered. That's what she said her name was when Maria talked to her in Crashdown the other day. Maria stopped in surprise. The girl was wearing her hair just like Maria's, and yesterday she'd been wearing the same shirt as Maria's. Who was she? My father says only dirtbags listen to Metallica, Sadie chirped at Michael. Michael narrowed his eyes, clearly trying to intimidate her. You shouldn't be talking to dirtbags then, he said. Sadie smiled brightly. I just got a new CD player, she went on, completely unfazed by Michael. Maria threw up her hands in disgust. This strange girl was following them, staking out Michael's apartment and now sitting in his restaurant, and he obviously didn't even recognize her. Well, he might not think she's a threat, but I do, Maria thought. Hey, you, Sadie, she snapped, walking right up to the little Maria wannabe. What are you doing here? The girl seemed too astonished to talk. Are you ordering anything? Maria demanded. Sadie shook her head. I have no money left, she said. We don't allow loiters in here, Maria told her. Get out. There was a shocked silence. Maria could feel her mother's eyes on her, and Kyle's, and Michael's. They all thought she was being a bitch. But all she knew, this girl's a skin, or an alien bounty hunter, or something else otherworldly and bad. I'm waiting, Maria added. Sadie's brown eyes filled with tears. She climbed off the bench, picked up her gigantic backpack, and shuffled out the door. Geez, Maria, be a little meaner, why don't you? Michael said, as soon as the door closed behind her. Don't you even recognize her? Maria cried, rushing behind the counter so she could talk to Michael without anyone else hearing. She's the one who's been following you. No kidding, Michael said. I'm not a total idiot. I was trying to get some info out of her. By talking about your bad taste in music, Maria said. Michael rolled his eyes. She's just a kid with a crush on me, he said. She's nothing to worry about. Marie was speechless. A kid with a crush on him? Michael was supposed to be the commander of the aliens' military or something like that, and this was how he assessed a threat? Michael plunked a tray covered with bowls on the order window. Soup's ready, he told her. Kyle, get some of that guy with him. And give some to your mother. On me. Maybe it'll make her like me better. She just kept staring at him. Now, Maria, he said, we'll talk about that kid later. Marie didn't know what else to do, so she picked up the tray and began serving the chicken noodle soup. Okay.
Chapter 6. Did she drink the water? Miles Wheeler demanded. Dr. Alan Sosa was rocking back and forth in his chair, sweating and moaning every so often. Maris found him disgusting. What kind of man could be so spineless, so frightened? She was certainly paying him well enough. He had nothing to complain about. Alan, she barked, focus. Did she drink the water? Yes, he stammered, at least a sip or two. Is that enough to get the serum into her system? Maris asked. I think so, Dr. Sosa replied. I don't know. It's not like any medicine
I've ever worked with. I have no idea how much it takes to affect a human. Maris rolled her eyes. Well, that's why we're testing it.
I have nothing against testing on animals, Dr. Sosa burst out, but this is wrong. This is using an innocent girl as a lab rat. She's not so innocent, Maris said calmly. The serum came from human DNA found on her clothes. Don't forget that. So what? He cried. She got shot. Somebody healed her. She probably thought it was a miracle. Now we're filling her body with DNA that no one has even been able to identify in 2 years of testing. Oh, please, Alan, Maris said. Do you think Liz Parker handed over her bloody waitress uniform of her own free will? It was taken from her. She was trying to hide it to protect the person who healed her. I don't care, he said. We have no right to use her as a guinea pig. You're wrong, Maris told him. Liz Parker knows the healer. She'll be able to withstand the serum. You'll see. What do you want for dinner? Michael asked as Maria parked in front of his place. Chinese, pizza, or cereal from the box. He opened the passenger door of the Jetta and unfolded his long legs from the tiny car. How about a salad? Maria replied, getting out of the driver's seat. What's that? Michael joked. Michael, seriously, I don't care what we eat, but I want to talk about that kid. What kid? Sadie, as if he didn't know whom she meant. She'd been complaining about that girl for 2 days now. The kid was following them. It was so obvious, and that was weird. And whenever anything was weird, Maria assumed it was some sort of threat to her boyfriend and his posse of aliens. Why aren't you taking this seriously? Michael fumbled in his pocket for his keys. Because, Maria, she's a little girl. Don't you remember Nicholas? Maria demanded. The leader of the Skins had been a young boy, not much older than Sadie. Well, he'd been an evil alien in the body of a young boy, but same difference as far as Maria was concerned. I like her, Michael admitted. He busied himself with unlocking the door. What? Maria cried. I think she's cute, he said, still avoiding looking at Maria. She cracks me up. She sort of reminds me of you, in fact. What? Maria cried again. Had he lost his mind? Michael pushed open his front door and stepped aside to let Maria in. Look, Maria, she hasn't even done anything threatening, he said. Maria didn't answer. She was too busy staring at Sadie, who was asleep on Michael's couch. Michael stepped up beside her. I think this is threatening, Maria said. What is she doing in your apartment? The sound of his voice woke Sadie. She immediately bolted up off the couch and stood staring at them, breathing hard. She looks like a terrified little animal, Maria thought, suddenly feeling sorry for the girl. But Michael seemed to have the opposite reaction. He strode forward and grabbed Sadie by the arm, dragging her toward the door. How the hell did you get in here? He bellowed. What do you want? Who sent you? Nobody, Sadie cried. I just tried the door to the patio and it was unlocked. Why are you following me? Michael sounded furious. Obviously, he'd come around to Maria's way of thinking on Sadie. I'm not, Sadie said. Her eyes were filled with tears. Michael, Maria took a step forward. She didn't want him to hurt the kid. Why were you searching my place? Michael demanded. I wasn't, Sadie cried. I just needed a place to sleep. I haven't slept in a long time. She began to cry. Michael, let go of her, Maria said. Michael dropped Sadie's arm, but kept glaring at her. You're the one who thinks she's a threat, he said. Looks like you were right. She's been following me. I have not, Sadie sniffled. I was following Maria. What? Maria stared at her, stunned. What? Michael said out loud. Why would anyone want to follow Maria? Shut up, Maria snapped. She pushed past him and stood in front of Sadie. Why are you following me? She asked. Sadie just shook her head and kept crying. Sadie, look at me. The girl raised her teary eyes to Maria. Who are you? Maria asked. I'm your sister, Sadie said. Hey, Liz, your turn. Liz gazed down at the polished wood floor of the lane. Her eyes looked glassy. This is worse than I thought, Max realized. Maybe I shouldn't have pressured her into coming out tonight. He talked Liz into going bowling as a way to blow off steam. It had taken about 20 minutes to convince her, and even then she'd seemed reluctant. Max was sure it was because Liz thought this was a date. He didn't want to pressure her, so he was determined to do his best to act undate-like. But Liz had barely even looked at him since they'd gotten here. Maybe she's trying to think of a way to tell me that she doesn't want us to be together, Max thought. Maybe she just can't handle the fact that I have a son. Liz, he said again. Slowly, she raised her big brown eyes to his. Yeah, she asked. It's your turn. Oh, Liz climbed to her feet and shuffled over to the ball return. It's really loud in here, she commented. Don't you think? Max listened. All he heard was the usual sounds of a bowling alley, balls hitting the wood, pins falling, people talking and laughing. Not really, he said. Actually, I think it's kind of quiet. Must be because it's a weeknight. Liz frowned. Everything seems loud to me, she murmured. She picked up her ball and walked away to the lane, way too bright. Max didn't know what to say. As far as he could tell, the bowling alley was the same as ever. Maybe you're getting sick, he suggested. Do you have a fever? I don't think so, Liz said. I did feel a little weird earlier today, but I thought it had passed. Otherwise, I wouldn't have come out. She half-heartedly tossed the ball down the lane, and it flew through the air for about 10 feet before crashing down onto the polished wood. People turned to stare, but Liz didn't seem to notice. She was gazing down at her hands in confusion. Liz, how did you do that? Max cried, rushing over to her. My skin feels funny, she said, like there are little ants crawling all over me, but it feels like they're under my skin. Max took her small hand in his own. He studied it carefully, but he couldn't find anything out of the ordinary. What was going on? Maybe Liz was having an anxiety attack or something. I think we should get you home, he said. You've been working really hard this week. You might just be overtired. Liz shook her head. Dr. Sosa sent me home early today. I slept all afternoon because I felt strange. I can't be overtired. Why did you get sent home? Max asked, surprised. There was a chemical spill in the lab, Liz murmured. What? Max cried. Was it dangerous? Maybe that's why you feel strange. Liz looked up at him and smiled for the first time all night. Of course it was dangerous, she said. Then she collapsed. So let me get this straight, Maria said. Not only did my father leave me and never so much as send a birthday card ever again, or a child support check, Michael put in, but then he traipsed off to Arizona, got married again, and had a whole other family, Maria finished. A whole happy family. Sadie wasn't sure what to say. It had all seemed so easy back at home. She would just stuff some clothes in her backpack, but buy a bus ticket to Roswell and check out her half-sister. She hadn't really planned anything beyond that. Sure, she'd fantasized about talking to Maria, maybe even becoming friends with Maria, but somehow it never occurred to her that Maria would want to talk about their father or that Maria would say bad things about him. Well, this is all crap, Maria muttered. She pushed back her chair and stomped outside to the patio. Sadie glanced over at Michael. Don't sweat it, kid, he said. She's not mad at you. I feel so stupid, Sadie whispered. My father is going to kill me. Now, and if Maria kills him first, Michael said. Sadie felt tears well up in her eyes again. She had spent the last hour crying, at least that's how it seemed. But I love my father, she sobbed. Michael looked frightened. Yeah, I know. I mean, of course you do, he said quickly. I didn't mean Maria would actually kill him. Sadie buried her face in her hands, kept crying. She'd been mad at her dad when she first found out about Maria. She found a picture in his office. In fact, she'd found a whole file on Maria. Report cards, pictures, and most importantly, her address. Sadie had seen her last name and figured out she was his daughter from his first marriage. The only problem was he'd never told her he had another daughter, so she'd been mad at him, mad enough to run away. I wanted to get back at my father for lying about Maria, Sadie sobbed, but he must be so worried about me. Michael opened his mouth, but couldn't seem to figure out what to say. Michael, Maria yelled, pushing back through the patio door. What did you do to her? She threw her arms around Sadie. Michael backed away. I didn't do anything, he protested. Sadie just sniffled and hugged Maria back. Maybe having a sister was worth running away for. Yeah, go, D-backs. Kyle cringed and moved as far away from his father as possible while still sitting on the couch. Usually he yelled right along with Valenti whenever there was a game on, but he'd been feeling strange all afternoon. Noises seemed louder than usual, lights seemed brighter, and the food at the crashdown had tasted funny. Gonzalez, huh? Valenti added, turning to Kyle. He's great. Kyle cringed again. Even when his dad wasn't yelling, the sound of his voice was way too harsh. What's the matter, son? Valenti boomed. Kyle slapped his hands over his ears. He took some cleansing breaths and tried to clear his mind like he did when he meditated. But the air felt funny going into his lungs. He took another deep breath and the feeling intensified. Now it seemed as if 1,000 tiny moths had flown in through his mouth and were spreading throughout his body, fluttering their wings. Panicked, Kyle leaped up from the couch. Valenti jumped up next to him. What? He cried. What's going on? I don't know. I feel tingly, Kyle said. He knew it was a lame explanation, but he simply couldn't find the words to express what was going on. Right now, it seemed that every single hair in his body was squirming about in its follicle. He just let out a little shriek. Kyle, just calm down, his dad was saying, but Valenti's voice was not only too loud, it also seemed to vibrate strangely. Kyle glanced over at the TV. He could no longer see the baseball game. Now the screen was covered with blurs of color and motion, but nothing sharp or clear. An alien thing? Valenti asked. Kyle stared up at his father, trying to figure out what he was asking, but the very sound of the words was still bouncing around in his brain. It was hard to concentrate on anything else. Taking you to the hospital. The last thing Kyle saw was his father's frightened eyes. Then everything turned white. The sounds disappeared. but the strange tingling feeling intensified. Kyle couldn't tell if he was standing or sitting and had no idea where his father was. I wonder if this is what Buddha meant by clearing your mind, Kyle thought, and then he stopped thinking anything at all. How old is your brother? Maria asked. She still couldn't quite believe that she had two half siblings out there and that her father had never bothered to tell her. He's 6, Sadie replied. His name is Richard Jr. Maria felt a lump rising in her throat and tried to swallow it down. He named his son after himself. It was like he just started over after he left her and her mom. He'd gone off and he'd gotten the family he'd really wanted. I was just some mistake he made, Maria thought angrily. I guess that's one feeling he and mom have in common. Junior, great, she said. Well, it all sounds very well adjusted and super. She couldn't keep the sarcasm out of her voice. Sadie looked down at her hands. Now I've made her feel bad again, Maria thought. Irritably, the truth was she liked Sadie. She didn't want to hurt her feelings, but it was hard to take in all this new information and not be bitter about it. So he and your mom are happy together, Maria asked, trying to sound friendly. Sadie nodded. Did he tell her about me? Oops, there was the bitterness again. I don't know, Sadie said. I found all that stuff about you in his office, but I never asked him about it. I never asked my mom either. I just got on a bus and came to find you. What I want to know is where he got those pictures of you, Michael put in, and your report cards. He must have had a private detective following you. That's true, Maria thought. All these years, had there been someone watching her? She didn't know whether she should be happy that her father had bothered her to keep tabs or freaked out that he'd had some strange person following her as if she were a criminal. Because if someone was watching you, they were also watching me, Michael added significantly. Oh God, another alien crisis, Maria felt overwhelmed. If a private detective had been following her, he could have seen some strange things. Alien powers, the Granolin taking off, who knows what else. He might have on file on Maria, and a whole different kind of file on Michael and Isabel and Max. You know what? I can't handle all this, Maria announced. She stood up. Sadie, I'm sorry, but you have to go home now. Sadie nodded miserably. It's not personal, Maria said gently. I'm glad I met you, and I'm sure someday we'll be good friends. Okay? Her little sister looked up at her hopefully. But your mother must be worried sick, and your father and you're our father. Maria grabbed Michael's cordless phone and he held it out to Sadie. Call him to come get you. Before Sadie could take the phone, it rang. Maria jumped up and almost dropped it. She pressed the talk button. Hello? Maria, thank God I found you, her mother's nasal voice said. I need your help. Why? What's wrong? Maria asked. I can't breathe. I'm having some kind of asthma attack. Amy gasped. My mom, you don't have asthma, Maria said, a gnawing fear growing in her stomach. I used to when I was younger, Amy told her. Maria, honey, I'm scared. Maria's heart leapt into her throat. I need to get to the emergency room, Amy wheezed. Hang on, Mommy, Maria said. I'll be right there. Okay, that was chapter 6. I guess we're going to read chapter 7 too.
Yes.
Isabel waited impatiently with the crowd outside the emergency room. Every time it looked as if she might be able to worm her way inside, another group of people would come running up with a desperately ill friend or relative, and she would have to step aside and let them in. She didn't mind, of course, but she was growing more and more worried by the minute. What was going on here? All these sick people. They seemed to have nothing in common except they were sick. So far, she'd seen only one elderly woman who had an ugly rash all over her arms, a little boy with uncontrollable hiccups, a middle-aged guy whose entire body was shaking violently in his seizure. The latest one carried by had been a girl around her own age who had been vomiting and was completely dehydrated. What's wrong with Liz? Isabel wondered. Max had called almost an hour ago to tell her he was bringing Liz to the ER. Of course, Isabel had rushed right over, but she hadn't been expecting some sort of epidemic. There was a brief lull in the incoming patients. The area in front of the door was empty. Isabel pushed past the 2 security guys standing in front of her and sped through the door. One of them called after her, but she kept going as if she hadn't heard him. Inside the waiting area was pandemonium. She scanned the room, searching for Max or Liz, not a sign of them. But much to her astonishment, she spotted Valenti sitting on a bench next to Maria. Maria's mother was with her, breathing from an oxygen mask. What on earth is going on here? Isabel made her way over to them. Hey, she said, what's happening? Are you okay, Miss DeLuca? Maria's mom shrugged and gestured to the mask with her hand. She's having a severe asthma attack, Maria explained, which is bizarre because she hasn't had asthma since she was 7. What caused it? Isabel asked, taking a seat next to Amy. Nothing she can think of, Maria said. That's why we're worried. Isabel glanced up at Valenti. She knew he and Maria's mom dated sometimes. Was he here for Amy or someone else? Valenti met her eye and nodded grimly. Kyle's here too, he told her. Isabel gasped. She and Kyle had been hanging out a lot lately, and she'd grown attached to him. What's wrong with him? They don't know, Valenti said, his voice tight with worry. He passed out at home, and he's been in and out of consciousness ever since. They want me to wait out here until they run some tests. Isabel frowned. Does this seem strange to you? She asked. Miss DeLuca getting sick, and Kyle, and Liz. Liz? Maria repeated. What's wrong with Liz? Don't you know? Isabel asked. Max brought her in here about an hour ago. Liz with Max? Maria looked surprised. Valenti shook his head. We haven't seen either of them. Hush, Maria said, nodding toward the two nurses who were hurrying across the waiting room. Isabel listened to the nurses' conversation as they passed. Everything from acne to symptoms of ALS, one of them was saying. I've never seen anything like it. Then the nurses were gone. Isabel glanced up at Lenny and spoke in a low voice. It seems like everyone's getting sick at the same time. Do you think it's like that green skin thing, something in the water? Isabel asked, referring to an incident a few months ago. She knew Valenti would understand what she was really asking. Did he think this was an alien threat of some sort? Valenti's brow was furrowed in thought. I don't see how it could be, he replied. Looking around, I see people with all kinds of different symptoms. And Amy's having an asthma attack, but that's not what happened to Kyle. And check out that guy. Isabel followed his gaze to a young man sitting in a corner between two people who were obviously his parents. The guy was talking loudly to himself, every so often swatting the air in front of him. His mother was in tears. His father stared silently at the ground. Schizophrenia, if I'm not mistaken, Valenti went on. Meanwhile, the woman over there was complaining that her eyesight suddenly started to go. And you don't think that one thing could be causing all these different symptoms? Isabel asked. I can't think of anything that could have such disparate symptoms, he said with a significant look. Isabel sighed in relief, but whenever something strange happened, she automatically felt responsible, as if the aliens must have caused it. And usually she was right, but maybe this time was different. Help me, a woman's voice cut through the noise of the ER. My son's having a heart attack. Isabel turned to look along with everyone else. Several nurses were rushing a stretcher through the doors of the ER, and on the stretcher lay Jesse, his skin pale and his eyes wide and frightened. Isabel was on her feet before she even realized it. They were pushing the gurney through the room at top speed, Jesse's terrified mother keeping pace with it. Isabel stepped forward as they passed her, willing Jesse to look at her, almost as if he could feel the weight of her concern. He turned his head ever so slightly and met her eyes. Jesse, Isabel whispered. And then he was gone, disappearing through a set of double doors into a hospital hallway. Everything inside, Isabel cried out for her to follow him, to comfort him and make sure he was okay. And if he wasn't, to find Max and make him heal Jesse. But he's not even my boyfriend, Isabel thought sadly. Jesse had broken up with her. She had no right to be at his bedside. Isabel, are you okay? Maria's voice broke into her thoughts. Isabel pasted a smile on her face and turned around. Sure, she said, sitting back down. I'm fine. Let me get this straight, Maria said. You put this serum in a water bottle. You watched Liz Parker take exactly 2 little sips of it, and then you sent her home with the water bottle. I didn't know she would share it with anyone else, Alan Sosa said defensively. It's unsanitary. Have you ever met a sanitary teenager? Maria snapped. This isn't my fault. Or Mara snapped. This isn't my fault, Alan insisted. You're the one who had me develop the serum. You're the one who told me to give it to Liz Parker. I'm not going to take the blame for this. No, Medichem will be blamed for it, you idiot. Mara slammed her hand down on her desk. Alan, do you even realize what you've done? She cried. There's an entire city full of people out there who have ingested non-human, possibly non-terrestrial DNA. They're calling it a virus. Apparently this stuff can reproduce and spread. Well, how was I supposed to know that? Alan cried. We never tested it before. Besides, it's not really reproducing. It's not a true virus. The healer's DNA just seems to attach itself to human DNA, and it doesn't just spread like a bacteria. I don't care if it lays eggs, Marish cried. It's hopping from one person to the next. It's getting sick. How can they all be sick from the healer's DNA? I told you we don't know how he heals, Alan said. His DNA attaches itself to the patient's DNA strands. Maybe he does something else while he's healing them. Maris dropped her head into her hands. This was a disaster. There's clearly some link to his healing properties, Alan said, because his DNA is certainly affecting people's health. Exactly opposite of how we want it to affect their health, Maris said. Alan turned toward her office door. You wanted a test, Maris. This is it. This is what the serum does to humans. His self-satisfied tone brought Maris back to her senses. She sat up and snatched her phone. What are you doing? Alan asked. Damage control, she told him. You're right. This is my test. I'm going to get the results. I'll see how it affects every single person who's been exposed to it. How are you going to do that? He asked. The hospital has already called the Centers for Disease Control. They'll take charge of it from here. I'll be helping them every step of the way, Maris said. Medichem will be like their new best friend. Liz felt as if she were swimming through the air. She'd never noticed it before, the way air pressed on your skin. It felt like a light, soft blanket wrapped all around her. She was beginning to get used to it, she thought. It didn't hurt, after all. It was just a different way of being aware of her body. Her eyes were still closed, but she could hear enough to tell her everything she needed to know. She could hear Max's breathing, and very, very loud as he sat next to her hospital bed. She could hear people moaning and crying in the beds all around. She could hear doctors whispering to one another out in the main waiting room, or waiting to one another in worried tones. And from out in the main waiting room, she could hear a crowd of people. She didn't hear them individually, just the roaring sound of the whole group. At first, the sounds had been too loud, but she seemed to be getting used to them now, too. Liz opened her eyes. Immediately, Max jumped to his feet. Liz, he whispered. It sounded like normal speaking voice. Liz smiled. Max had learned not to talk too loudly since she'd gotten sick. Hey, she said, are my parents here yet? He shook his head. I think it's pretty crowded out there. They might have trouble getting in, he said. Liz just nodded. She stared up at the tile ceiling of the hospital. The tiny specks in the tiles seemed to be moving around, forming shapes. The lights weren't too bright anymore, but she thought she could see different colors in them. It's changing, she told Max. Before everything was too harsh, the sounds, the lights, it's all just different. He looked worried. They haven't even done any tests on you, he complained. When are they going to come back and examine you? It's okay, she replied. They checked out my heart and my lungs. I'm not in any immediate danger. If it's crowded, they have to treat sicker people first. Why is it so crowded anyway? Max wouldn't meet her eyes. It's some sort of epidemic. What? Liz cried. Everyone is sick like me. I don't think so, Max said. As far as I can tell, everybody is sick in a different way. I heard some of the doctors talking. They don't know what's causing it. Liz studied Max's face. His eyes were bloodshot, almost as if he'd been crying. He's really worried about me, she realized. Liz reached out for his hand. I thought your skin hurt, Max said. In the car, you couldn't stand anything touching you. Well, that doesn't apply to you, she told him. He took her hand in his. Liz closed her eyes and let the sensation in her skin wash over her. She felt the warmth of Max's body seeping into her as if his love was a tangible thing. In fact, if she concentrated really hard, she almost thought she could hear his heart beating. You have to leave now. The voice was harsh and loud enough to make Liz jump. Her eyes flew open, and she saw a doctor standing at the foot of her bed. He wasn't looking at her. He must be talking to Max. Are Liz's parents here? Max asked. I don't know, but you have to leave, the doctor insisted. Max, no, Liz cried. I told her I'd stay until her parents. All visitors must leave the hospital now, doctor interrupted. We're overcrowded, and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention is on its way to investigate. They've ordered us to send everyone home unless they're ill. The CDC, Liz whispered. Is this a contagious disease? Max demanded. We don't know anything, the doctor said, but as a precaution, we'd like to separate those showing symptoms from those who are healthy. If it's contagion, we don't know how it's spreading. Everyone is sick with something different. How can it be one disease? Max went on, raising his voice. Why is the CDC coming? Liz pulled her hand away from Max so she could cover her ears. Immediately, he turned to her. Sorry, he said, lowering his voice. Max, go, Liz whispered. If something's happening, you'll be able to figure it out. If you find Michael and Isabel, don't worry about me. He searched her face. Are you sure? He mouthed, glancing at the doctor whose back was turned. Liz smiled. I don't think you have much choice, but as long as you're out there trying to solve this, I'll feel better. Okay, Max didn't sound too confident. I love you, Liz. Then he turned and followed the doctor down the hallway. Maria bounced her leg nervously. She didn't know what to worry about most. Her mother, who was still wheezing air through an oxygen mask, her little sister whom she'd left at her house with Michael, her father, who was even more of a jerk than she'd ever thought, or the entire city of Roswell, which seemed to be in the grip of a bizarre autoimmune failure. Max, Isabel cried, over here. Maria spotted Max waving his way through the crowded room. When he saw them, his worried expression turned to one of confusion. What are you guys doing here? He asked. Who else is sick? He glanced at Maria's mother. She has asthma, Maria informed him. Kyle's inside somewhere, Valenti added. He sort of passed out. And Jesse, Isabel added, the new lawyer from Dad's firm. Where's Liz? Maria asked. They have her in a room. She was one of the first ones here, Max said, but they haven't figured out what's wrong with her. They barely even tried to. He glanced around. Have you seen her parents? No, Maria said, but it's getting more and more crowded. They might have a hard time finding parking and getting in. Then they're not going to get in, Max said grimly. They just kicked me out of Liz's room. They want visitors to leave. Something strange is going on here. Where's Michael? Isabel asked. Maria shot a glance at her mother. She hadn't told her who Sadie was when they'd gotten to the DeLuca house. Amy was too sick to care why Maria had some kid tagging along with her. He's babysitting, she replied. Isabel raised her eyebrows, and Maria was spared any more explanation because at that moment, about 20 people in big puffy decontamination suits burst into the waiting room. If this were a movie, Maria thought, everyone would be screaming and running around in terror. But in reality, all the people in the waiting room were so frazzled already that they just stared numbly at the people in the suits. One of the suits made his way over to the reception desk and picked up a microphone. His voice came over the PA system. We need everyone who is not sick to please file slowly outside, he said. Nobody moved. That is, if you're here because you are ill in some way, you can stay. The suit said, everyone else has to leave now. Maria and Isabel exchanged nervous glances. I'm not leaving until someone tells me what's wrong with my son, Valenti called. Me either, yelled someone else. The protest caught on and the room filled with angry voices. I'm afraid you have no choice, the suit answered. We're from the Centers for Disease Control, and we've been ordered to set up a quarantine here. Here we go again, Maria muttered. What about my son? Valenti yelled. Those actually ill will be transferred, the suit replied. The hospital will be kept running as usual for accident, injuries, pregnancies, and ongoing medical care. Now Valenti jumped to his feet. Maria grabbed Amy's hand and held on tight. Transferred where? Max demanded. Why? We are taking those who are ill over to the new Medicam building, the suit explained. Their labs are more up to date than the hospital labs, and they've graciously offered us the use of their facilities to quarantine and care for the sick. This news practically caused a riot in the waiting room. People in suits, the regular doctors and nurses, and the patients and their families were all yelling and pushing one another. Maria was so busy trying to figure out who was in charge that she didn't even notice the cops until Isabel grabbed her arm. I think we should do what they say, Isabel said grimly. Look outside the doors. Maria looked through the glass windows and the doors. Outside, there were a bunch of cops in riot gear. Where do they come from? She asked. They're not local, Lenny commented, stepping up behind them. Roswell doesn't even have that many cops. My guess is they're private security. Maybe the CDC brings their own goons with them. Around the room, people were quieting down. It seemed everyone had realized the CDC was calling the shots here. Maria turned to check on her mother, but Amy was gone. Mom, Mom, she yelled. She thought she could see Amy heading off down the hallway with a nurse. Mom. Maria realized she was being herded toward the door with the rest of the crowd. What about my son? Valenti was yelling. Who do I call to get updates? Mom, Maria cried. She felt tears running down her cheeks. Where were they taking her mother? How could they just pull her away like that? She felt an arm around her shoulders and Isabel and looked up into Max's eyes. Come on, Maria, she said. He said, we have to go. My mom, she said. We'll figure it out, he told her. We always do. Before she could protest, they were outside on the sidewalk in front of the door. Maria's group was one of the last to leave. She and Max turned around as they got outside. The doors closed in their faces.